All right, welcome again. Take two, the first take had a technical problem, but hopefully this will get worked out. We're going to talk about the film After the Storm, the 2016 one. There are a number of films available. Please make sure that you get the 2016 one directed by Hirokazu Koreeda. I'm James Hoadley. I'm glad to have you back. I hope you enjoyed our last film, in Dinner and the Movie, the film Departures. This film, After the Storm, is a different film, and I hope that you will enjoy this one as well. Let's get right into it. Okay. So the film was released in 2016. It was written, directed, and edited by Hirokazu Koreeda. The editing part is particularly interesting. Not a lot of directors anymore will edit their own films. The writing part and the directing part, those are fairly well done, but not so many edit, and Koreeda is unusual in that regard. Um, Please note that the hyphenation in Koreeda's name is simply to uh, indicate the proper pronunciation for English speakers. There is no hyphen in his name in Japan. Koreeda. If we ran it all together, people would say Koreeda or something like that. And no, it's Koreeda. That's why they put the hyphen in there, or occasionally they put an apostrophe. The Japanese title is not After the Storm. It's actually Even Deeper Than the Ocean, which is a reference to a song by Teresa Teng, which I think we'll get to in just a second. It did receive some international recognition. It was nominated for Un Certain Regard in Cannes, which is, it's certainly nothing to sneeze at, but it's not the most prestigious. It's not a Palme d'Or or something like that. So it got some recognition, but not hugely. I don't think that award shows really determine what's good cinema and what isn't. And I certainly enjoy this film, and I don't think there's, other than introducing us to high quality film that we may not have experienced otherwise. I think that you can put a little bit too much emphasis on how many awards it is won. There's nothing wrong with the film. It did win a Golden Hugo, and it was also awarded the Chicago International Film Festival. For those who are studying Japanese, I did include at the bottom the tagline for the film in Japanese, Yume mita mirai, Yume mita mirai to chigao ima o ikiru, which means living a life different than the one that you imagine, living a future different than the one you imagined in your dreams. It's tough. It makes more sense in Japanese. Moto kazoku no monogatari. So a monogatari is like a tale story. It's a very old Japanese term. The Heikei monogatari and the Genji monogatari were written, very, very long time ago. So monogatari is a very, very old word, but it implies that something is like a saga or something like that. And motokazoku means, so it's the saga of an ex-family, which I think when you put it all together, it does do a good job of synopsizing the film. So the main characters, not all of them are going to appear quite as much as some of the others. Move over here for a second. And these are not listed in order of who appears most or who's the most important, because really the character that you see the most and who is really kind of the center of the story here is Ryota, played by the inimitable Abe Hiroshi. He's one of my favorite actors. He can play both serious and comedic roles. And here this is kind of a wistful role, so he kind of needs to be both funny and serious at the same time. I think it was an excellent casting choice to put him in. Then there's Yoshiko, speaking of another great actor who passed away a few years ago, Kiki Kirin, plays Yoshiko, who is Ryota's mother. Then we have Kyoko, who is Ryota's ex-wife, played uh, by Yoko Maki Yoko. Maki, of course, is the family name. You may recognize her. She was in a couple of Japanese horror films that did get some play in the West. So if you do feel like you recognize her and you've watched, I want to say The Grudge, um, you might recognize her from that. And if you don't, she's a very good actress, and I'm glad that she wasn't pigeonholed into just doing horror films because she has an excellent range. And this young fellow, Shingo, is their son, Kyoko and Ryota. So he is, in fact, in this photo, you can actually see I cropped it to make it center on him, but he is actually on a train, sitting on a bench literally between his two parents. So it gives you kind of a clue as to what's going on there as well. And he is played by the young Yoshizawa Taiyo, who has gone on to do a number of other things since then, but he looks really young, and that short haircut is very consistent with young baseball players. Okay. So the mostly spoiler-free synopsis: Ryota, the main character, is a former prize-winning author whose life has not turned out the way he expected. He works as a detective to pay for his gambling addiction while he tries to maintain a relationship with his son, Shingo, and to sort things out with his ex-wife, Kyoko. His mother, Yoshiko, lives alone in an apartment in a very quiet suburb of Tokyo after the death of his father. Ryota's sister, Chinatsu, is very suspicious of Ryota and his constant financial problems, particularly as it impacts their mother. A typhoon is approaching. That's, I think, all the background you need to know. The setting is the city of Kiyose, which you can see highlighted in red here. You can see that it's outside of what we consider to be Tokyo proper, the city area. These little dots here at the bottom are the islands. Tokyo Prefecture actually includes these tiny little tropical islands that run in a straight line, basically south from Tokyo. And Chichijima and Hahajima are actually a 24-hour ferry ride away from Tokyo harbor itself. That was just a little bit of an aside. Doesn't have anything to do with the film. Sorry. So Kiyose, it's practically in Saitama, but it's still in Tokyo Prefecture. It is not served by a major highway. It is not served by a JR line. These are indications that Kiyose has never really been a focal point. It's not to dig on it too much, but it is kind of quiet. You can see this is a picture from the shopping area in front of the main station. It is served by the Seibu rail line, and you can see these style of lights and street signs. It's very, very nostalgic, although they're still it's not retro. This is still the original stuff from the 80s, probably is when it was originally installed, and it's still there. So there hasn't been a whole lot of fantastic development because it's still kind of a backwater. And as you can see from this photo, it's an area with a lot of agricultural land. It is a bedroom community, so there are people who take the Seibu line into, I think, Ikebukuro Station, which connects to the subway lines, the JR lines. That was actually the way that Japan developed after World War II, was that property developers couldn't get property down here, so they had to move further and further out. And in order to get people to move to their housing developments, they actually created private rail lines that fed into the main rail lines, the subways, and the JR lines in downtown Tokyo, and that's precisely what has happened with Kiyose. So Kiyose is not going to be a location where there's going to be a lot of tourism. It's not a location where there's going to be a lot of corporate headquarters, but it is a location where a lot of middle-class people will live and work, and also a lot of farming. It apparently provides a lot of mostly vegetable farming. Now, as we said, that there is a divorce that is kind of central, so let's talk first about marriages, because if you don't have a marriage, you can't have a divorce. So here we can see the number of marriages over time. 1972 was the peak, both in the excluding this part here, both the peak in the rate and the number of marriages, and it's been in steady decline ever since. Um, the This is probably driven in part by population, also driven in that, driven by a number of factors that I don't really want to go into. I think we'll save that for the discussion after. You can also see that the average age at which people got married in Japan has been increasing. The best numbers that I could get over the last, 20, almost 25 years there. When we went back 25 years ago, the average age when women got married was 26.3 and men was 28.5. You can see now it's gone all the way up that men are in their 30s and women are effectively 30 as well. The divorce rate used to be incredibly low in the late 50s, early 60s. An incredibly low divorce rate, very unheard of. Much more common today, but it did go up and peak in about 2002, and now it's steadily trending downward, which is driven in part by the fact that people aren't actually getting married. So if you don't get married, you can't get divorced. And if you wanted to chart the U.S. On this as a comparison, right now the U.S. rate is about 2.9 divorces per 1,000 population, so you can see it's about 1.7 for Japan, so it's still significantly higher in the U.S., but the U.S. has followed a somewhat similar path, although in the U.S. Divorces peaked in the 1980s and then have been trending downward since Japan waited until 2002. Okay. One more thing about divorce that is necessary, which I did not include a slide for, but I will say that's very important. There is effectively no joint custody in Japan. That's really important to know here because it's kind of critical to know that for this story. Children, the former prime minister of the early 2000s, Junichiro Koizumi, had a number of children, but he got divorced. When he got divorced, he received sole custody of his older children, and his youngest child stayed with his mother. And there was a great scandal because it was reported that his youngest child had never even actually met the prime minister. That's an extreme, but it's not that far from extreme. In Japan, when parents get divorced, the cultural expectation is that the one parent is leaving, and when that parent leaves, they will sever all contact, and that's seen as being the best for the child. This is not meant to be a commentary. This is not meant to be an endorsement or anything like that. I'm just stating things how they are, not saying that it's right or it's wrong. Okay. Another issue here is the aging of Japan. Kind of figures in here as well. As we all know, the Japanese population is aging, and it's finally reached the point that it's starting its inevitable decline. It is interesting to look at this to see that the very young, the youth under the age of 14, the peak. Well, there were two peaks, kind of one in 1950 and one in 1980, whereas the peak of people in the working age was right about 1990. And you can see the peak for elderly people about 2010 or so. But Japan has an increasing aging population, which is very well known. The importance of dependence on social structure, Amae no Kozo, the famous book by Takeo Doi. There's a lot of criticism of this book as well. And I don't have time to go into that, but to understand relationships in Japan, I think it does do a decent job of explaining that the value of relationships in Japan is often expressed in the importance of one person being dependent on someone else. Someone is always relying on the other person. much as a child relies on their parent. And you will see that, a little bit of a spoiler there, you will see some of that in the film, or at least you'll see people attempting to do that. Japanese Literary Awards, you can see the list of Japanese Literary Awards. That's quite a long list. It's not as large as the U.S. list, but one of the things that mitigates that is in the U.S. There are a lot of awards for people who fit into certain subcategories, not just subgenres, because like you have the Japanese fantasy, adventure, fiction, those sort of mystery, those kinds of things. The U.S. has all of that, but then the U.S. also, because being a multi-ethnic, multiracial society, has books for various awards for various groups. There's a women's writer mystery award. There is an African American adventure award. Short stories for sure. Or a Hispanic novel award as well, which makes the United States have a larger number of awards. But for a nation of its size, Japan has a pretty good number of literary awards.